So I'm Bernie Smith, founder of Made to Measure KPIs. I wasn't always a KPI enthusiast, so I started life as a professional engineer, and I fancied the excitement of what's now called Lean Six Sigma. So I started off in a career working with large blue chip manufacturing organisations to deliver step changes in their operational performance. I travelled the world problem solving with people like Coca-Cola, Smurfit Stone, Borealis, big industrial processes, lots of pressure, really interesting, but not at all family friendly.
Right.
So I took that skill set and transferred it across to banking before Lean Six Sigma was really fashionable in the banking sector. And I've worked with every UK retail bank and quite a few of the global investment banks as well, applying typical tools and techniques of improvement. I decided that I wanted to work for myself. So I looked for a pain point in the improvement process and in business that I'd seen, repeated consistently. And the thing that stood out to me was how much people dislike KPIs. The physical reaction you get when you talk about it, you can actually see people flinch sometimes. And at best, they think it's boring. At worst, they think it's an instrument of torture. So I thought, well, there's an opportunity here. If people dislike it so strongly, well, can you avoid it? No. Actually, for reasons we can go into later, I think good measurement's the cornerstone of any business. So how can I make it a bit more palatable, a bit less painful, and simplify it? Because there's an awful lot of nonsense spoken about KPIs. So that's my goal now, is to make life simpler and less painful, and so that people can get on and do other stuff that they find more interesting. So that's what I do sort of professionally. Personally, I'm dad of two. I live in Sheffield, in Yorkshire, if people know where that is. So just on the edge of a national park, and very unusually, I'm getting some sunshine through the blind. But I was woken up by rain driving against the window this morning. So yeah, dad of two, live in Sheffield in the UK. Enjoy photography, hill walking, and I've got a bit of a gadget addiction as well. So I've always got
Right.
something new hatching in the background.
That sounds great. And Made to Measure, the company that you set up, do you think you mentioned that people often flinch when you mention the word KPIs or key performance indicators? I think there might also be an element of guilt that comes in as well, because I think a lot of people in business know they probably should be measuring something, but are not entirely sure what, and therefore it gets down prioritized. And so whenever you mention the word, it's probably, oh yes, I know I should be doing that. But
Yeah,
yeah, I hear
that's a really really good way of putting it. I mean, I think there's two things that stop people doing stuff. There's the effort involved in doing it, and whether they feel confident doing it. So if it requires a large perceived effort and they're not really sure what to do, then it's never going to happen. And
no.
I can't wave a magic wand, but we can try and make it a bit
Yeah.
simpler and a bit more accessible.
Yeah, yeah. And what we'll do is we'll have a little chat in a minute about the process, because I've been through it now quite a few times, both for my own company and with others, and I love the process. So that's
Good
how
to
you and
hear.
I got in touch, didn't we, Bernie? Through me basically, first of all, buying the book and then delving deeper, and eventually we got in touch, and I've gone more into becoming a rocks practitioner. So we can talk about that. But why do you think, out of interest, KPIs are so important? I mean, they are important, but
Yeah.
from your perspective, could you explain why?
Well, I use a pretty simple example when I do my training. So I show a picture of an Ohio class submarine, biggest nuclear submarine in the world. And, it's got 18 intercontinental ballistic missiles on it. It has a crew of several hundred, nuclear powered, no windows. So if you're going to steer a vessel like that, you've got a choice. You can either use, you know, radar, sonar, GPS navigation, inertial guidance, or you can guess. Now, you've got a multi-billion dollar war machine there. You're not going to guess which way to point it. You might get lucky, you might not hit something for an hour or two, but it's definitely going to go wrong in the end.
Mhm.
And yet people think it's okay to run a business like that.
Yeah.
Now, with a business, you get a little bit more feedback, a bit more information, but fundamentally it's the same principle. You can either use fact to direct your business, in which case you're going to end up where you need to be most of the time, or you can guess, in which case it's almost certainly going to go wrong at some point. And most businesses, they don't. I've not met any business where they don't measure anything, but there's often a reluctance to measure more because of a perception of effort, cost, or that they think they know the answer.
Yeah.
So fundamentally, you're steering this big machine. You've got a choice of doing it based on facts or based on intuition, and I think facts will always win in the long term.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. It's a great analogy, actually, and as you say, it's undisputable. You cannot argue with that, and it's true. I think in business there are a lot of businesses that are flying blind for one reason or another, and as soon as one gets a little taste of key performance indicators, it's almost impossible to go back, to accepting the fact that you don't know. And I've certainly found for myself that I introduce a few at a time. I think that's something you advise too throughout the process of throughout the ROCS methodology, is that you define what you should be measuring, but it's not necessarily true or practical to think you can just suddenly switch it all on. So you take on a few at a time. But the more you build into the business, the more engaging it becomes, really. The more you rely on those key performance indicators to actually tell you how you're performing. So I think they're like little powerful weapons, or I mean, you just used the word weapon, but little power bombs, if you like, that just give you that.
I have another way of putting it, which is you're cheating.
Right.
You're giving yourself an unfair competitive advantage. It's like playing someone at cards and being able to see their cards.
Right.
If you have, I mean, ethics aside, if you have that opportunity, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
You're making your life harder by not doing it.
Yeah.
There's a kind of tipping point in businesses where you start out and it's an effort and people are uncomfortable and it feels a little bit forced. And then you get to this point where people walk in and they want to know. So I saw this in manufacturing. People would come in, we put in efficiency measures, and it was a bit painful and awkward to start with. And then at some point, a few weeks in, people would come on shift and they go, "How did we do last night?" And that it's just tipped. It's gone from being an effort and being forced to core to their view on the world. And that's the key. And that's why it's important not to do too many at a time, because people can only cope with so much change. So focus in on the important ones, and then once that happens, they've internalized it and you're on the road to success.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Now, do you think it makes a difference, the size of the company? Do you need to be a big company or a medium-sized company, or is this just as relevant for small companies, do you think?
So I think it's universally relevant. I think all businesses need good quality information to support good quality decision making. There are some profound differences in terms of the way you implement KPIs and also the practicalities. So I'm a micro business and I know what it's like. I've got a website open, I'm working on my e-learning, I've got my invoicing to do, I've got, this long list of stuff. So small businesses do not have the same amount of time available to sort of hand build the right KPIs. It took me a little while to realize this. So my first methodology was built with corporates in mind because they were my clients. So it was the banks I was working with. I started drawing out a flow chart of the steps we needed to go through. And after doing that a few times, I thought, this is crazy. I actually need to proceduralize this. And that's what gave birth to KPI checklists, which is my corporate method.
Yeah.
Now, that requires a few people to sit down and spend a few hours building something called a KPI tree. My experience of small businesses is you're much more likely to jump on Google and start looking around than you are to build a KPI tree. Yeah. So what I did was built a walled garden of useful, likely candidate KPIs and a quick way of choosing from those. And that's the ROCS Express method. And that's designed for people who are in a hurry, and it's a choice between no KPIs, Googling their KPIs and doing it in a slightly more structured way.
Yeah.
And that book looks a bit like a phone book because it's got 415 pre-built definitions in there. Oh, there we go. So it's designed to do a lot of the pre-thinking and the pre-digesting. So the fundamental need for KPIs is the same. The way in which businesses implement it, their capacity to implement KPIs and their capacity to design them is very different. And I would also always recommend that small businesses start micro. If you've got no KPIs, just look to implement 2 or 3 to start with. Do not overwhelm yourself because you will get fed up, give up and go home.
Yeah.
Whereas corporations tend to have teams of people who are available to make sure it happens. So it's a
Yeah.
different thing.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think, I've timed out this whole methodology, the Rocks Express, and really how much time needs to be dedicated to get from A to Z, with your finished set of KPIs, not to the point of implementing them, but I mean to kind of identify them, um, to go through, the process that you've laid out. And really, within a good day and a bit, you can come a really long way, can't you? To actually
Yeah.
saying, okay, this is what's important. This is what we should start implementing. And then the process is to actually start implementing them. That can take longer, obviously, but I think even just knowing what the KPIs should be or what you should be measuring is a really good step in the right direction, because then you've got a plan as to what you can implement in the forthcoming months. You've got something to work towards. So just going through that process, I think, is a really great thing. Now, you mentioned a minute ago about Googling KPIs. So can you tell me about your take on Googling KPIs? Because I know you're not a big fan of that.
So there are times and places where it makes sense. The trouble with googling KPIs is there's a few dimensions to it. Firstly, you don't know the thought process or the credentials of the person who's written the article. So as my mother used to say, if you're going to copy someone else's homework, make sure they're better than you. So that's the first thing. Secondly, you don't know what their objectives are, what they're actually trying to achieve with those KPIs. And the example I use when I give my talks and training is KPIs are simply tools to help you achieve an outcome. So I use the example of a DIY store. You don't go to a DIY store and go, I'm going to buy some tools. Well, some of us do, but then you end up with loads of tools you never use. You go there with a job in mind, and KPIs are just the same. So it's very dangerous to pick someone else's KPIs up because they may have a different intent from you. And then the final thing, and this is the big one for me, is you find little pockets of KPIs. You'll find, the best web marketing KPIs or the best finance KPIs, but they're in little pockets. They're all expressed in different ways, they're defined in different ways, and they're not part of a whole system. And actually, as a business, you want a small hand-picked selection of KPIs that are defined and expressed in a similar way, and work together. So there are times where it's appropriate to go and have a look. If there's industry standard KPIs, for example, in paper making, you're going to measure caliper, you're going to measure, trim waste and things like that, and that's fine. But you need to keep ownership of it, not pass that ownership over to someone else who wrote an article at some point somewhere.
I totally agree with you. Yeah, and that is the danger, isn't it? I've done it myself before. Googled and come up with a list which you don't feel any connection to. For starters, it's just another list, isn't it, of things that go on the to-do list of things to do one day. But as you say, you haven't internalized the why around those KPIs, and therefore they don't become a priority. And the other thing is what I found through going through the ROCS process, the ROCS Express process, which is for the slightly smaller, medium-sized businesses, is that you come out with a good balance or a good mix of financial and operational KPIs. It's not too heavily weighted in one direction, as well as you come out, or I seem to certainly come out with a good balance of leading and lagging KPIs. So those that are looking at history and those that are looking to the future. So my list, I don't know if if it's part of the magic of the system, but it was really well balanced when I came out the other end, actually. So
well, that's good to hear. I mean, it's not an accident. The ROCS Express method is built based on 52 KPI trees, which the reader never sees. But those KPI trees are based on 6 fundamental common objectives for small businesses, only one of which is financial. So, profitability and solvency is one of the objectives, but there's objectives like growth, innovation, risk management, compliance, and quality of life in there. So the KPIs are designed to drive all 6 of those common objectives. So really pleased to hear that the KPIs are actually coming out as a good balanced mix, because that was how they were intended to be.
No, that's really good, because I took a look at the end, because I didn't, when I put myself through the process, because I was training myself since I have gone into being a practitioner and an advocate and an ambassador for ROCS, is that I thought, well, number one, I need to do this on myself, of course. So I didn't deliberately go out to kind of jinx the system or anything. It was just that I looked back and reflected on what had happened, and I thought, wow, that really does make sense, actually. If you look at the objectives that I had at the beginning and the goals, and the KPIs that have come out the other end, some of them were no surprise, but there were a few there that I thought, oh gosh, yeah, I wouldn't have come across that as a KPI, but I see how it makes sense for my business. I really do.
Well, that's good
Some
to
of
hear.
the financial ones, some of them were relatively kind of, ones that we maybe had before, and relatively not, obvious, let's say,
Yeah.
obviously, appropriate and good. But it's the more, as I say, it's the operational ones that I think people fall down a little bit on. I think people are more familiar with financial KPIs than they are with any other type of
Well, they're
KPI.
often the best served in an organisation because you have certain legal requirements around
Mm,
accounting and keeping on top of your finances. That information is accessible. It's obviously also the lifeblood of a business, but as they say in Yorkshire, you don't fatten a pig by weighing it. So finance is great, but we need to do something to actually drive that underlying
yeah,
performance.
absolutely. I think that's the key word, isn't it? It's the drivers, what's driving the business, and one's got to dig down and measure those too. So, what about the process of actually writing the books? Because you've written many, like not
Yeah,
just one or two.
I'm actually writing another one at the moment on targets and incentives,
Ah,
which is a really interesting topic. I've got 13 different case studies in there,
oh,
and the more you dig, the more you find.
gosh, yeah.
So, in terms of writing them, I find it incredibly painful. I think
Oh,
anyone who's written a book knows the pain. And I have a secret weapon, which is the Pomodoro method. Have you heard of that?
oh, refresh my memory. I think I might have,
Okay.
but I can't.
So
Yeah,
so it relies on something called the hockey stick effect, which
right.
is when you've got a deadline, have you noticed how you suddenly get lots more productive just before the deadline? So what
Yeah.
you do is you create multiple artificial deadlines throughout the day.
Hmm.
And what you do is you can vary the numbers, but I do a 20-minute sprint. So I
Hmm.
have a timer. You work flat out for 20 minutes, and whatever you're doing when the timer goes off, you stop. And that's because the brain will not let you forget something that's partially completed. They've
Okay.
discovered this through research with waiters. Waiters forget orders almost immediately after the customer's paid, but until they've paid, it's in their heads.
Right.
So you do 20 minutes, you stop on the button when the timer goes off. 5-minute break, so I'll just go and surf the web or whatever.
Mm.
Another 20-minute sprint. So you do 3 cycles of this, and then you have a longer break. So I typically take 15 minutes, and then I give myself a little sticker, a magnetic puck
Oh,
on the
gee.
board. And if I can do 4 cycles of that in the day, it doesn't sound like very much, but if I can do 4 cycles, that's a good productive day. And that was how I wrote the 413 definitions in here. I use the Pomodoro method just to
Right.
pace myself out.
That's
So that's
yeah.
that's that's the way I get myself through it.
No, well, that's a really good tip, actually. So not only are we getting good tips on KPIs, but good tips on actual, being productive. So I like that. I've not tried it. I haven't.
It,
But
it works for kids as well.
yeah, okay, interesting. We'll give that a go. And the little sticker that you get, that's your incentive, is it? There's no
Yeah,
way.
I actually have little. I've got a whiteboard, and I have little magnets. So I have
Yeah.
uh, green for an hour and blue for 4 hours, and then I have weeks marked out on the whiteboard, and I can see what my week looks like. I know
No,
it's sad, but
yeah,
it
no,
works for me. I've got my own sticker chart.
yeah. I think it's really sweet. Okay, maybe I'll get one of those. Yeah. So, okay, what about KPIs in terms of how they've evolved over the years? I guess, I mean, you've been working with these things a really long time.
Yeah.
Are they the same, or have they changed?
So people are getting more sophisticated. Really, some parts of the market are, and that's shaped by the maturity of some organisations and also the ability, computational availability. So Apple Watch that has something called an index KPI on it. So I don't know if you've got one of them, but it'll give you a
I've got a Fitbit.
movement.
Hmm.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Fitbit gives you a score that's basically a mashup of activities. So they take quite complex heart rate, altitude, and motion data, and they turn it into a composite measure. And
Mm.
those are relatively new. Now, indexes have been around for a while. So the FTSE 100 is an index,
Mm.
but we are seeing more indexes because we have more embedded computer power. So if you get in a Prius, you have an economy score, which is a really complex algorithm involving acceleration, deceleration, regenerative braking, and everything else.
Mm.
Amazon have a driver score. So the phones of Amazon contract drivers, measure acceleration and deceleration, and they actually score and rank their driving based on how courteous and safe they think they're being. So there's a whole raft of complex index measures sort of gradually permeating the world. Once you're aware of them, the more you look, the more you see. So that's a relatively new thing. And the other thing is, of course, people are being bombarded with transactional data because so much is in the cloud, so much is online, so many of us use systems. There is an absolute ocean of raw data which you can fish in.
Yeah, it's lovely, isn't it?
It can be overwhelming. That's the thing, you know.
Yeah, it can be. It can be. It's lovely if you have good systems, at least, you know, to
absolutely
rifle through the data and dig out the good stuff. So, what about what makes you get up every day? Obviously, this is what you do, and you're in your own, as you say, Persian-sized niche, as you like to call it. But is it the drive of seeing businesses improve? Is it finding out better ways to actually do things in business? What is it that really gives you a buzz?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think there's a few things. There's definitely ego. So I get fan mail, which just absolutely makes my day. So I get nice emails from people saying, "I bought your book, good job," and you know, it scratches an itch. So shameless egotism. I also like to make things simpler. So I've always, in every aspect of my life, my kids mock me relentlessly. So if they ever say, for example, where will I find rubber bands? I say, go to the drawer marked rubber bands. I don't know if you can see that. So I have an inbuilt drive to simplify and to explain things. And there's also a pleasure in creation as well. Having a book with your name on, having a website that you designed, that gives me pleasure. But fundamentally, it's about helping businesses do things better and improve their world, and doing it in a scalable way. Because for many years I was a consultant, and I felt I was pretty okay at the job, but there was always this awareness you could only work with one client at a time. And that brings a certain feeling that, well, when you stop doing it, your mark isn't there for very long afterwards. People change, people move on. So I'm also driven by a desire to systematize and share that methodology so that it can help lots of people.
I agree. I'm a fan. I think you've done a great job. And then finally, what I'd like to ask you is, you are an expert on these KPIs. You've been doing this very many years and have a great background in all of this. You've also, as you say, been a consultant. You're a businessman. So what would you, if you have something, a quick tip or something that you could advise a business to do today, a quick win, something that they could implement quickly that would take them a step forward? Maybe it would be read your book. Maybe it could be that, but something else maybe.
So I'm a big fan of clarity, and I'm a big fan of limiting the number of things you're thinking about at any one point. It may just be me, but it's very easy to be a rabbit in the headlights. So my advice would be pick 3 things, and they might be KPIs, it might be measure one thing or read 2 books, and don't worry about anything else until you've done it. Now, it's harder to do that than to say it. I know how many competing things there are, but I think focus and simplicity are the solution to actually moving forwards. If you're staring at too many things at once, then nothing will ever change. So that's the way I approach things anyway.
I like that. I do because as you say, it's overwhelming. There is so much we could do. The to-do list is never getting shorter, ever. But I mean the nice thing is, and the thing I have to remind myself of is there's only ever one thing at the top of the to-do list. So I spend quite a lot of time ordering my to-do list, and I don't worry about all the stuff at the bottom. I just worry about the thing at the top, because I am an inveterate to-do list creator. But you're not trying to do it all, you're just doing one thing at a time. No, I do. I have a slightly different system. I've got this massive long to-do list, but what I do is I don't rearrange them, but I just colour one in or 2. So I'll colour one in maybe bright red or something, and then maybe another one orange and another one yellow. Just, there's no sort of specific system, but it's just so that when I look at it, it pops out, because otherwise they just get lost in all the other
So you're using a technique called visual encoding there.
Oh,
So
am I?
that's
Well, there you go.
yeah. So I'm just doing a course on this actually. So I'm
Yeah.
just about to put one on my website.
About that. But
Yeah,
thanks so
and
much for joining me today, Bernie, and really sharing these insights. So I think there is so much to be gained. And if anyone wants to get in touch with Bernie, it's pretty easy to find you, isn't it, on LinkedIn and on your website,
yeah.
Bernie Smith, and on Amazon, all your books, they're easy to find and
Indeed, if
buy.
you type in KPI, it's normally number one or number two
Yeah,
KPI
they are.
checklist.
And they're really worth a read. And of
Thank
course,
you.
with me as well, if you're in Norway, where I am, and you would like to sort of discuss any of this in Norwegian, then I have a good amount of materials that are translated into Norwegian, so that we can go through this process together here in Norway, in a comfortable way here in Norway as well. So just get in touch.
Fantastic.
And thanks a lot, Benny, and we'll speak soon.
An absolute pleasure. Really nice to see you again, Laura. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.